heavens declare the glory of God.
Force them to appear on video. I think
Right.
that's illegal.
Well,
or something.
Yeah. Well, if I ask that legally, I can,
True.
but I don't care because
I
like
understand. You're not trying to make any enemies.
it's exactly. I really not. What is the most important thing in life?
Sort of a vague question.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think it's fulfilling my intended purpose. I'm a Christian. I think God has a design, a way that people are supposed to live, and I think fulfilling those like responsibilities is
Okay.
what you're supposed to do.
Okay. I see what you mean. So, I mean, I would say pretty much for everyone, right? Fulfilling your purpose
Sure.
doesn't always mean they know exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's a very vague phrase, so it could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Of course. Look, I understand. I asked that though, trying to get a more general answer out of you.
Sure.
But you even said already that you're a Christian, so I already know a big amount about your worldview, your ideology.
I would say
So you believe there's some kind of afterlife, but why do you think there's an afterlife?
I would qualify my statement that I'm a Christian by saying I am a Christian with sort of not incredibly high confidence in a very specific interpretation of the Bible. But I would say, why do I think there's an afterlife? Well, it's something that most people throughout history have believed, so that's one main reason.
Okay.
And I think it's clearly something that the Bible suggests is the case. Those would be the main reasons.
Okay. So you believe the Bible is true?
Yes.
Okay. So you believe also then there's some kind of external creator or independent cause for the universe, right?
Yes. I think it's hard to think that the Bible is true in any meaningful sense and not believe that. So, yes.
Well, no, I get
There are
that.
people who think
But
that, I don't think
like
they're really...
say outside of the Bible, right? You give me some scientific reason or philosophical. Could you give me that?
I don't find logical proofs of the existence of God very compelling. So I would say I don't believe in God because of philosophy, but because of the Bible and and religious tradition.
Okay.
I think it's very hard to reason about the universe as a whole. I'm a very like empirical sort of concrete thinker. Like I work in science, and that's how I think about things.
Okay.
You can't really do science on the universe because we can't like observe it. You can't observe something. I mean, yeah, it's just you can't observe something that's beyond the observable. So I don't tend to be persuaded by like the ontological sort of arguments.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you mean.
I don't think that there's like a good philosophical reason to not believe in God either. I just don't think that that abstract reasoning gets you much ground either way.
Okay. Like metaphysics and stuff. Like Aristotle was the one who came up with the idea of a prime mover.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. I don't tend to find those kinds of arguments very interesting.
Okay. Well, and a lot of it is it's speculation with philosophical reasoning. So
And I shouldn't say I don't find them interesting. I'm happy to talk about them. I just don't. They aren't like what gets me out of bed in the morning or what really is the like a core foundation of what I think.
Yeah, which I mean, I would say
That's probably true for most people, right? Most people are not like, the Aquinas' ontological argument, that's really what shapes the way that I live my life. Nobody thinks that. So.
Well, even like that's why you'd hold a worldview in the first place, right? Even like atheists will subscribe to, say, materialism or naturalism. It's not necessarily someone's argument.
Sure. No,
right?
I think that's right. I think it's silly to think that, to pretend that all of your beliefs are like founded on fundamental axioms and then reasoning therefrom. I think we all come by our beliefs in a much less rigorous intellectual way.
But in the sense of science, you can observe effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Big Bang was an effect.
Sure.
Or sorry, it was an event, and we see the effects for it, right?
I think we reason about the Big Bang happening based on its presumed effects.
Right.
But yes.
I'm getting a call.
That's okay.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Press the power button, it cuts it. Just the volume. Okay, so I absolutely love the way your brain is working. I don't want to say that I have the verbal capability that you have, but I can say that my brain does think in that same wavelength. But I do especially love philosophy myself. But I do believe that there is some kind of creator, because there is evidence for it in a scientific sense, but it's in that the universe appears to be complexly tuned.
Yeah. I think I would say I'm mildly sympathetic to that view. I guess the problem I have with that as like a basis for belief is...
But that's just
Compared to
one idea.
No. I agree with that. I think the anthropic principle is like sort of, or that's not what it's called, but like the fine-tuning argument. I think that's reasonably compelling. But I guess the reason that doesn't do it for me is like, compared to what? Like, we don't have any other kinds of universes that we can say like,
well,
this is
it's
not
a
like
box
that.
top view. It's that you start from the bottom. So what we have observed, that like things that we design or things that we fine tune, right, or things that require someone, an
Sure.
external source of that object itself, so then that object can work correctly, always requires someone else, right? It requires that external force to have some kind of intellect.
Mm-hmm.
So then we reason from there, and that the universe without those utterly astronomical numbers, then so you reason from there to say, okay, there has to be intelligence behind the universe. Doesn't necessarily have to be the Christian God or the Islamic God, right? But some kind of intelligence. And even like math itself, mathematicians are finding that it has to come from a mind. It's being discovered, not created, right? So that's another thing that goes with part of the fine-tuning argument. But like the fact that I believe that God exists is not just that. It's a collective case that I hold to. So like morality and like truth, these metaphysical ideas that we know that they exist, and we can all say that no, it's just some psychological idea that we've come up with as human beings and we're all dependent on it. But the fact that we act as if they exist is immense evidence that they do. It's just that to say something like truth does not exist is essentially self-defeating, right? So these things are self-proving. If I say that truth exists, I make a truth claim, and in order for that claim to even be a truth claim, truth would have to exist. So stuff like that, it's like there has to be a source.
I agree. I think of the philosophical proofs for God, like these are the ones that I tend to be more persuaded by. I think in my life the argument for the existence of God that I found the most compelling is like you're saying, sort of a moral design principle. I think C.S. Lewis talks about this, that like it seems like morality seems to exist, and that it seems inconsistent with being a moral being to explain morality. It's just this thing that evolved. It's just like a survival mechanism. Like we treat it and we really want it to be like a thing that really exists.
But that's putting yourself outside of it, right?
And that really implies that that there is like intelligence and not just chemicals interacting with each other. I agree with that.
Exactly. And you still essentially are assuming some kind of system that has invoked that, but you're saying that system is less than you, which also puts you down and your reasoning down. But that's a whole nother thing too.
Yeah. I mean, I think all that is true. I guess what I'm saying when I say that I don't find these things utterly compelling is like, I mean, I guess everyone accepts this at some level. Like, ultimately, you can reject all of these philosophical arguments if you really want to. If you really want to bite the bullet, you can.
Right.
And so I don't think like, I guess if I were trying to convert someone to Christianity, I wouldn't expect that argument to work. It could, but like, if you really want to not believe in God, there's nothing you can't like reason your way into that in an ironclad way.
Are you saying that I'm a Christian?
I strongly suspect that you are. There's a lot of nonverbal cues that you are a Christian.
Oh shoot! Darn it! Is it the genes? Is it the fact that I'm wearing?
The fact that you said that you are interested in people's worldview. That's sort of a very
Very Christian thing.
term.
Darn it.
Atheists don't tend to talk about worldviews. I don't know what they talk about, but they probably don't usually.
They usually talk about how stupid.
That's
No,
true.
not necessarily.
They don't do a lot of street interviews either. I think they're not that interested in what other people think.
Well, I think it's also because you kind of have to have the stubbornness to be an atheist, especially in the modern world. Like, even if you were to just study the thousands of peer-reviewed NDEs, near-death experiences,
Sure.
you would come out believing there's some kind of afterlife and metaphysical world, and that the world isn't just material. So, but it takes you to have the heart for that, or to have the psychological pull. So ultimately, they're blocking themselves from the truth, right? It's like they hold themselves back from it, whereas only specific truths that they go for. When I do research, I go for everything. I go for the counter arguments. I go for the arguments that are positive, negative, everything. I even just did a little research today about the Kalam cosmological argument, and I looked at all the negatives. And the negatives are like maybe, but I don't think they stack up to the positives near as much. So,
well, I wouldn't claim that religious people as a class or Christians as a class are somehow less or more open-minded than atheists. I think.
Yeah, no, I understand that too.
Most people are totally closed-minded about a lot of things.
But I'm also assuming a lot when I say that about atheists, because that doesn't mean every atheist,
Well, I think part of it too is that they, understandably enough, aren't very interested in like what other people think. Like if you're a Christian,
like ideology just in general.
if you're a Christian, like there's a reason, like the Christian ethic is like that you would want to share that and you would want other people to also be a Christian, but there's no real reason to spread atheism. Like there's no, if you're not a Christian, why would you care that other people were? Like, if I were an atheist, I can tell you that I would not have any problem with other people not being an atheist. Why would I give any?
We're all going to heat death or just spreading apart anyway.
And if it makes you happy, I wouldn't want to talk you out of that. So I think atheists just aren't interested in like persuading strangers. Understandably so. Yeah. So that's probably why they don't.
I do know some that are, but I know what you're saying.
I think the ones that are, it's not. That's true. There are some that are, but it's for other reasons.
And they tend to be like, either it's like anger or it's like few and far between. But if that worldview itself is true, then there's ultimately no point, no purpose, just nihilism. And so therefore, why even argue? Why even argue why it's true, right?
It does seem odd. The only explanation is that they just temperamentally like arguing, which is certainly true of some people.
Right, exactly. which means that there actually is something psychological going on. But that's the same for anyone with any worldview anywhere. There's always something psychological going on, not just reasonable or logical, right? It's not just a reasonable. Right, or not just a good reason why you believe that. There's something.
I agree, and it's very difficult to disentangle those things.
Yes. Bias, especially.
It's very easy to think that you know where your rationality starts and ends, but usually people are wrong when they think that.
So to move forward, and I have loved this conversation definitely so much, or definitely to this point. I would say that even just a big reason and a compelling reason why I would say subscribe to the Christian worldview or to the Bible in general is if Jesus rose from the dead. And of course, it's that if that is true, then unless you have some like weird idea like we're in the Matrix or like truth doesn't exist, which I already said is self-defeating, even in the Matrix, that if we're in the Matrix, that itself has kind of been disproved. I forget which philosopher it was. My brother mentioned it today to me. But regardless of that, Jesus.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't be a Christian. Like,
well, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, because maybe that's the purpose. But, but then if Jesus had risen from the dead, he vindicated himself, right? He claimed that he was God. Even just look at the earliest source in Mark, right? When he was before the high priest, he referenced a time in Daniel where he says that he will be seated on the right hand of power, or the right seat of power, and you'll see the Son of Man coming down from the clouds of glory. And instantly the high priest rips his clothes and he's like, what further witness do we need after we've heard this blasphemy or something like that? Yes. And it's just that the anger is like instantaneous because he knows it's a claim to divinity. Yes. Right? So if he generally claimed that in the earliest source, in which he did many other times in Mark, not just Matthew, Luke, then essentially what we have is a person claiming to be God, and if he rose from the dead, vindicated, right? It's true. Because if he is God, then by definition, he can't lie. He can only tell the truth.
Yeah, I agree. I think if the Gospels as written as we have them are correct, then it seems pretty clear that he's claiming to be God.
So, but I have just a few more specific questions because you're a Christian. Do you share your faith on a consistent basis?
No, I don't.
You want to more?
I would say I vaguely do.
I would say it's in most Christians' hearts, at least I hope.
think I do when it's convenient. I don't like put a ton of effort into putting myself in a situation where it would happen more often.
Like me.
I probably should. But I don't. It's not like I'm. I guess what I'm saying is I don't go out of my way to not share my faith, but I'm also not like spending a lot of time making that like my like today I'm gonna do this. Like I don't do that very often, which I probably should.
I mean, even the Great Commission. Matthew is probably a great example of this, to go out and spread the gospel to all creatures. And it's that we should be pushing ourselves to bring about those opportunities. That's how I look at it.
I agree. I think that you can't spend a lot of time in an evangelical or a Protestant church and not be told that a lot of times, and I certainly am.
Yes.
I guess I would say the biggest thing that holds me back is, and I don't think this is like, I'm not normatively justifying it, I'm just saying like psychologically, like I said, I don't feel a lot of certainty about my beliefs, even though maybe I may sound like I do. I have very low certainty about them, and so that makes it difficult for me to.
Yeah, I do think that would make a difference, because I know people who have come from, like, say, atheism or Islam, or even from just a world of sin. They are converted then, and they become Christians, and because of their conversion and ultimately their experience has given them this idea, like, I need to tell everybody.
Yeah.
Because you'll see that with the disciples, right? For goodness sakes, Peter denied Jesus, and except for 4 ran off completely, and 4 were there at the foot of the cross, and all the rest just ran away. The main disciples had run away and essentially denying Jesus. But then Jesus rising from the dead completely changed them around, and where now they have this fervor and this insane amount of desire to preach this truth without even just like, oh, well, we're just following this guy. It's like, no, he's not even here. We're doing this because we're telling you this is true, and you need to believe this. So I do think you're right that I think you need that, honestly. I've grown up in a Christian home, and I haven't really had any like super experience myself. It's just that I know that it's true, so why shouldn't I tell people? That's how I look at it. Like, people are going to die. Over 300,000 people die every day. Why shouldn't I tell these people at least? Even just small things like handing them a tract. Just say, this is a gift for you. I would love it if you read this for me. You know, you have no idea the amount of impact you could have.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a bad use of time.
So, because I'm not even told to convert people, I'm just told to spread the gospel.
That's true, and I agree with that. It would be not a good idea to take personal responsibility for what someone else believes. You can't control that. But I guess what I would say is, and again, like I have no problem with handing out tracts. I think that's a totally fine use of time. I have a hard time doing it because, like, I know I would never be persuaded by a tract, and so. Yeah.
Depends on the tract. Maybe it's a really good one.
No.
I'm actually writing. I'm going to try and write 2 tracts right now, which go over the God theory and the resurrection theory. That's what I'm calling it. It's really, you could technically call it a hypothesis, but if there's evidence for it,
that's okay.
Then it's.
I'm not being a stickler on terminology.
But regardless of that, I want to make something that's compelling to intellectuals. You know, something that actually gives like philosophical arguments based off of the scientific evidence that we have.
I think that's a totally laudable goal.
And I want to do it to get these people to realize that this faith that I have is not unreasonable. It's not fake. It's actually based on evidence, right? Sure. I have a genuine relationship with God. What I believe is not just for one single reason, right? As I said earlier, it's a collective case. Yeah. And so that's that's ultimately what I continue with. God continually proves himself to me time and time again, even when I doubt him. And of course, that grows in a relationship. It's bound by trust. But then because of that, then I want to go out and tell people as well. So it all is like this perfect circle, is that it continues to help me with my doubts. Not that I don't have doubts, but then it strengthens my trust as well. And then it strengthens my actions, and I move my feet more and actually do stuff and get my feet dirty.
Yeah. No,
So
I'm with you in spirit. I do wonder if handing out tracts in general is not like the highest yield use of your evangelistic time. It may be that like people may be a better use of your time. But I'm not, of course, not saying that you're not doing that. But I guess I would say, if I were to spend more time evangelizing, which I concede I should, probably wouldn't hand out tracts. It would be more.
you're buying books.
It would be more to people that I know. Yeah. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. And it's fine to give tracts to people you know too. But I guess I'm saying, if a stranger handed me something trying to persuade me of something, I don't think that would never convince me. So I feel like it's very unlikely to convince most people.
Which I understand. And a lot of the reason I hand these out is just get people to think, right? I've noticed some of the difference, these ones specifically, scientific facts in the Bible have made. A lot of people, Christian or not, will say, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know this was in the Bible. It gives them an interest into God's word already, right? So it's just like you're slowly pulling them to the other side. You're giving them some light. Rather than flashing the whole thing all at once, you give them like little bits, and they're kind of like, okay, this is compelling. Yeah. And so that's why like certain tracts, I think some are...
Well, obviously, yes, there's bad ones. I have a question for you, Sam. I have a question for you. And I'm not implying this about any particular tract that you have, but my question is, if a tract made an argument for the existence of God that wasn't very good, but someone still found it persuasive, let's say the argument was bad and it wasn't even a good argument. It was not true. But if someone found it persuasive, is that a good thing?
Well, you have to look at what the purpose of life is, right? If it's genuinely to know God and to make God known, right? To ultimately have a relationship with him, then technically everything that leads in that direction is a good thing morally, right? Because morality is purely based off of the purpose. And the purpose is purely based off of the giver of life, right?
No, that makes sense. I guess my concern is...
Like, I understand
there may be a level...
There's a philosophical issue, like there's a logical issue with that. It's just that it's more like there's a partial wrong, but then there's also right, so it still is an overarching right. It's just that I would, as a Christian, study myself to show, or show yourself to prove unto God a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, but rightly dividing the word of truth, right? So I have the logic correct, so I just don't do stuff like that, even though I probably have before. And
it was hypothetical.
No, and I appreciate that. I would just say, personally, I don't think, according to the reasoning I gave you, I don't think it would be morally wrong.
I don't think so either. I guess it's more of like a strategic question. My concern is if I think on an individual level, if you have a choice, I mean, obviously you don't have this kind of choice, but if we could either have someone believe something that's true for the wrong reasons or not believe something that's true, clearly we'd rather them believe something that's true. Right. But my concern is that if a lot of people are Christians but don't have a good, like they are so for the wrong reasons and have given good counter arguments that would cease to be a Christian. Like, we don't want a whole like society full of people whose worldview is based on incorrect information. Like,
that's actually a lot of what I talk about in my videos. Actually, is like, why be a Christian if you don't even know why it's true?
Right. And I think there may be some people who are like persuaded by a tract that's not very good, and then those people, you know, they're not going to be very able to stay a Christian when confronted with better information. And so
and I understand. I think the church has done a lot of really bad job on that. And I understand the strategic issue. Like, in a Christian perspective, it's just not a good idea.
Right.
You ultimately should give these people like an actual like good reason to believe why those things are true. J. Warner Wallace is actually an apologist who teaches at Biola University. He teaches high school students. And I think he also teaches college. But regardless of that, that's one of his big gripes with the church today, is that they don't do a good job of actually teaching like why it's true, really, other than just some religious reason.
I agree.
And then they go off to college, and then they lose their faith because why?
Right.
They had no real reason to believe that it is true, and they didn't even understand it either.
Right.
And so that's why we need Christians in general to just understand the Bible as a whole, like truly comprehend what the story is, and like, why did Jesus die the way that he did, which is another big thing in my channel, understanding the gospel.
Sure.
Because when you truly understand the gospel, there's no reason not to trust him, right, at that point.
I'm with you all the way.
So
Any more questions for me, Sam? Because I gotta go. I gotta go here in a
I
minute.
see that, yeah. Well,
Oh yeah, but we, anyway, I've got a few more minutes for you.
okay, wonderful.
You used only a very narrow part of that. I mean, because like this, like if you want people to understand,
Yeah, that's
what it
true.
means to be a
I
Christian,
understand.
like, this is kind of a huge part
Yeah,
of
yeah,
sharing our faith, as well as being very involved in a church that like cares a lot about.
Yep, I think that's true. There's more than evangelizing people on the street is certainly not the only way to contribute to the cause.
Correct. In fact, many times at work, like I try to be a godly example. I am not all the time, but like every Valentine's Day, I made this a tradition where I make all my coworkers on my line their favorite dessert.
Sure.
And that is just me trying to show them
that's great.
unconditional love, right?
Yeah.
They didn't do anything for me. I do it because I care about them.
Right.
So that is also evangelizing.
Yes.
So you're right, yeah. So it's a show and tell though,
Yeah.
right? You don't just tell people and then treat them like dirt.
Or not interact with them ever again.
Yeah, or not. Exactly. Even though, in this case, like it's really hard. I do this so I can preach to them because how can they hear without a preacher, right? So
I think there's a place for that.
that's why I do this as well. I don't just do the showing.
agree.
I also do the
I
telling.
would think of what you're doing now as a more like specialized thing,
It
like
really
like the New Testament talks about, like the the fivefold ministry or whatever. Like some people are evangelists and some people aren't, and so like certainly some people are going to spend more of their time talking to strangers than others. I don't think we should all spend all of our time talking to strangers.
Yeah, I can tell you that. I didn't do this yesterday because I didn't think, I genuinely thought it was kind of a waste of my time. But now today, like, for goodness sakes, I even got to talk to you. So, but these are important things to talk about and to understand. And ultimately, I want you to be more grounded in your faith and just ask the Lord to help you to be more grounded.
Sure.
And I would just say get into God's word is one of the biggest things. Like me being pulled into Christianity is just through me actually reading my Bible and studying it. By God's grace, I've been able to read it through 10 times and study it through many more. And so because I just genuinely understand it, I just hear someone else's argument and I'm like, that just doesn't stack up logically. That just makes literally no sense. So like I have essentially the correct view. And so therefore, when I know I have the truth, I know what else is false. So even though I forget what that argument is called, or what that philosophical idea is called, which is what it would be. But it's ultimately what I want to end on is like, get into God's word, read it every day. I always tell myself this: no Bible, no breakfast, no read, no feed. The first thing I do in the morning is I grab my Bible and I start reading it.
Sure.
Because ultimately God is the most important, but I try to like study it, take notes. I try to genuinely listen when my dad's actually a pastor when he's preaching. It's because I want to care more, and that helps me to care.
Yeah.
And then that helps me to learn more, right? So I think that'll help with a lot of the weaker surety.
Sure. It's a discipline. Yeah.
It really is, right? It's not just a one and done. It's like, no, when Jesus said you need to give up your life in following him, like it's giving up your life, man. Like, yes, you trust him, but it's a continual denial of yourself, taking up your cross and following him. It's not easy, but it's what we need to do, right? So, because it's against all natural pulls towards like selfishness, pridefulness. So,
Sure.
But thank you so much, Mr. Joel.
Yeah.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me talk to your husband.
No problem. Happy.
So yeah, and you have such wonderful kids. They're all very beautiful.
They're okay.
Where
Where does your dad preach?
End it here.